Just a minute. Laser pointer turned on. Great. Yeah. So, hello all of you. Thanks a lot for joining for this first problem solving session for the course Introduction to Semiconductor Devices, which is being conducted by Professor Naresh Imani from IIT Hyderabad. Just to give you my introduction, I am Soham Lakhote, currently a fourth year PhD student at IISc Bangalore, working under Professor Gaurav Banerjee, and my area is in the analog and RF circuits, especially for vital signs monitoring of human being, that is your heart rate and breathing rate. So now, what will be the organization of this session? So this is a 2 hour session, right? So but we won't conduct 2 hour session every time, depending on what has been taught and how much content is there to cover. So we can reduce the session a little bit if there is not a lot of content that has been covered in that particular week. So normally this will be the organization. We will first have a session for 50-60 minutes. After that we will take a 10 minutes break, and after that we will resume our session. Okay, and all the recordings, these lectures will be recorded, and all these recordings will be uploaded to this YouTube channel. I have already copy pasted the link for this YouTube channel into the chat box. In the break time, just remind me once again to copy paste this link into the chat section again, because there are still people who are joining this meeting, right? So just remind me later just to copy paste this link. Okay. So now, before moving on to the technical content, so for this lecture, I'm planning to give you an overview of the entire semiconductor industry rather than directly jumping onto the Schrodinger's equation, right? Because if I don't build up the motivation for this course, then there is no use of teaching, no use of taking the problems, because first of all, you have to get a feel of what is there in the semiconductor industry and why whatever you are studying, whatever you will be studying in this course, why is it so important and how is it going to help you, even if you don't want to go into the device modeling, or you don't want to go into the circuit design, why this course is so important, right? So now let's build the motivation, and the first motivation for this course is the money, right? So now this chart has been taken from the report from the McKinsey and Company, the favorite company for all MBA and IIM graduates, right? So now if you look, the currently they told in the 2021 the industry's size is around $590 billion, right? And in 2030 it is estimated to reach $1 trillion, right? Now how can we compare this $1 trillion size? Then just look at the note over here. So currently the IT industry market over the entire world is currently sized around 1.2 to 1.3 trillion dollars, right? And you know how much employment IT industry gives in our country, right? And now it is expected that by 2030 the semiconductor market will also reach to the around $1 trillion. So there will be a lot of jobs that will be created. So the first thing is the field where you are currently entering. See, the moment you registered for this course and you are attending this session, it shows that you have a little bit of interest in the semiconductor industry, right? So now this CAGR that you are seeing, the CAGR growth, right? So this is at least telling us that the semiconductor industry is not going to stagnate at least till 2030. It is gonna grow, and it is gonna grow a lot bigger from here, right? So till it reaches the $1 trillion, right? So now out of this $1 trillion, we have to see what are the components, what are the different industries that are contributing to such a huge market size, right? Because semiconductors are used everywhere, not only in particular area, but from the car to your phones to your Wi-Fi router, like even in your fridge, right? Everywhere they will be used. So now we have to see a breakdown, like what percentage of this $1 trillion will be contributed by different industries. So now the first industry that we have is the computing and data storage, right? So you must have heard about that chat GPT from the OpenAI, right? So you know how large that how much time it must have taken it to train that model, and how much computing resource it must have consumed to train such a huge data set, right? So now as the AI side, as the people start building more and more complex neural networks, and they start implementing heavy ML algorithms, it will be a good news for us guys, because we are going to build a hardware on which they will be running their algorithms. They want the computing power, and though that computing power will be coming from us, because we are the ones who will be designing the processor. So some of you may go into the circuit design. Circuit design has also a lot of fields: analog, RF, the digital guys. Some of you may go into the semiconductor device modeling, right? So now the thing is, this processors and all the computing power, the GPUs, CPUs are built by the VLSI guys, right? So now as that AI and ML field grows further, because of the complexity of the models, it will be a good news for us, because it will be generating revenue for us, and the more the revenue, the more the jobs will be created by the industry. Now the next one is the wireless communication. I don't have to explain you that, because you all have the very advanced phones in your hand. Like some of you must have joined the meeting from your mobile itself, right? Not from the laptop, correct? So I don't need to tell you like how big the industry is, and why the wireless communication, why the mobile phone is so important in your life, right? It has so much of electronics present into it. We will do one thing. I have two slides where I have the tear down of the iPhone 12 Pro Max and 11 Pro Max, right? So we will look into it, how much electronics is actually present in that iPhone, and this number will not look like a very big number after seeing that tear down, because our mobile phone is almost completely filled with the electronics rather than all rest of the stuff, rest of the materials. So now the next part is regarding the automotive electronics. So I also have a breakdown of this, like why automotive has so many sensors, so many electronics inbuilt into it. So these three are the very major constituents, right? And most of the circuit design guys, wherever they go, they get to do the circuit design in these three fields only. Mostly almost 70 or 80% of the guys, after doing their MTech or BTech, they get placed into very good VLSI companies, and most of them will go into the circuit design profiles, which will be related to these three industries, right? So now let's move on to the next slide, and let me give you a very big picture, right? So on the right, what you are seeing over here is the semiconductor foundry. Now what is the job of the semiconductor foundry? So whatever circuits we are designing and whatever functionality we want, right? So now the job of the foundry is to fabricate that functionality on top of the silicon die. So now what is the silicon die? So you must have seen these black colored ICs, which I am showing over here on the left and on the right as well. So these are your packaged ICs. If you open that black encapsulation, if you break it down and if you look inside, you will see a gray color stuff. That is actually the silicon chip, right? And that silicon chip is being fabricated by your foundry. And this is just not the silicon, it contains the transistors, your MOSFETs, your BJTs and all, your FinFETs as well, right? So now this is the job of the foundry, to take the specifications, to take the design from the circuit design guy, that is to take the GDS file and to print those patterns, whatever he has designed in the layout, to print those on top of the silicon wafer, and then give this bare die to the customer. It directly does not go to the customer. First this bare die goes to a packaging company, assembly and packaging company. They wire bond this chip into this black colored package, right? Then you have the legs over here, and now this IC that you are seeing, it becomes one of the components of the entire PCB. For example, just take the example of the motherboard of your PC, right? It has so many black colored ICs. So this one IC is just one of the what you can say, a small drop in the ocean, right? So now this was the job of the foundry, correct? So this packaging and assembly is being done by different companies. So most of the assembly and that testing happens in some companies in Asia only, like mostly in Malaysia and all, right? So now this is regarding the foundry. Now currently you guys are over here, you are studying this course, semiconductor devices and modeling, right? So now what we want, let's say I want to design some circuit using any transistor, let's say MOSFET or FinFET, right? I want a very accurate model of that MOSFET or the FinFET, right? So that when I design using that model and when I fabricate the circuit, I get as close as result which I am getting in the simulation, right? But you know, this is the manufacturing process, and the manufacturing process is never ideal, right? It always contains some uncertainties, it has some errors, the yield is never 100%, right? So it contains some process variation, some temperature may change, some pressure may change, right? And because of that, the parameters of your circuit may also change, its functionality may also change, right? So now I want someone from the foundry to tell me whatever model I have, whether it will work perfectly or not, right? So now who is going to ensure that this model that I have is going to be if I design the circuit and if I fabricate it, then I will get as close results as possible, right? So now there is someone called as the PDK engineer. So what is his job? So now he is in contact with the semiconductor foundry, he is in contact with the CAD tool guys. I will explain you in a few minutes what are these CAD tools, right? So now what is the job of this PDK engineer? So whatever ideal model I have developed, so if you just want an example, then just go to the Google and just type BSIM 4 model, BSIM V4. So just type that model and just see how many parameters this model will contain. I'm sure these parameters of a single MOSFET, just a single transistor, it contains around hundreds of parameters, right? So now the job of the PDK engineer is to ensure that he should contact with the foundry, whatever model that we have. First of all, this model, he should change it according to the results that he or she are getting from the foundry. So if whatever modeling I have done, let's say I am getting some variation after the fabrication, then that slight variation that PDK engineer has to incorporate in his model, in his or her model, right? Only then he can give that model to the customer and tell the circuit designer guy, hey, I have given you this model, I have practically check this model, it works very well. Whatever simulations you will do over here, you will get almost the same results, only a slight variation will be there. Only after telling that, the circuit designer will get the confidence that I can design the circuit very confidently. I don't have to worry about the process variations happening inside the foundry, because the PDK engineer has taken care of that, right? So now this PDK engineer, you can see this is for particular foundry. This image has been taken from, I guess, Google. It is inside the TSMC foundry only. So this foundry, since the process variations will change from foundry to foundry, there are many different semiconductor foundry. Of course, TSMC is the biggest and it contains the almost 60 to 65% of the market share, right? But there are other foundries like Texas Instrument has its own foundry, even the Intel has its own foundry, the Global Foundries is there, right? So these process variations will be varying from one foundry to another foundry, right? So the PDK engineer, the model that he develops for a particular technology node, what do I mean by technology node? That is the your channel length of the MOSFET in a very rude manner, right? So now whatever model he develops for one foundry, that will actually vary to if he cannot use the same model in the other foundry, because the process variations are different. Let's say this fab is located in Asia, let's say the Texas Instrument fab is located in America, let's say, right? So now the pressure is different over there, even the weathers are different, so the effect that it will cause on the circuit parameters, even that will be different. So the same PDK will not work, whatever PDK worked for one foundry, it may not work for other. He has to tweak it a lot, right? So that's why you can see that UMC 180 nanometer is different, TSMC 28 nanometer, UMC 28 nanometer, Global Foundries 28 nanometer, they have their own PDKs, right? So this is the reason why they have their own PDKs, and there is not a common single PDK across all the foundries, right? So I hope till this point it is very much clear to you. If you guys have any doubts, then please feel free to poke me at this point of time, because as I go ahead in this presentation, the lecture may get slightly technical, and today's lecture will be mostly about the introduction and giving you the big idea only. At last we will cover just 2 or 3 problems, and after that we will just leave and enjoy our evening, right? So this is regarding the PDK engineer. Now the next thing is how the circuit designer will be designing the circuits, right? I just told you there are hundreds of parameters in a single MOSFET. If I tell my experience, then I'm an analog and RF circuit design guy, right? So on an average, I will be at least having 14 or 15 transistors in my simple circuit, right? So now just imagine how many parameters it will be if I have 100 parameters for MOSFET. So I cannot do it theoretically, I cannot do it on paper, right? I need to use the computing power that has been given to me, not that has been given, but we have advanced very much, right? You must have heard about the Moore's law, right? So that we have been able to double the number of transistors every 18 months on the same amount of silicon area, right? So now since we have a good amount of computing power, somebody needs to develop a software where I can take the model which contains the hundreds of parameters, and the moment the circuit designer places its circuit, the tool should be able to calculate the results, right? What do I mean by results? Maybe let's say the gain of the circuit, maybe the bandwidth of the circuit, maybe the output waveform of the circuit, right? I should not do it on the paper, because it will take me forever just to analyze one circuit if I incorporate hundreds of parameters, right? So now this is the job of these CAD tool companies, that they design this software. And what are these software? So you must have heard about the Cadence and the Synopsys, right? So these two are the softwares that the circuit design guys use, the digital as well as the analog guys, right? So what they do, they have this PDK, they work with this PDK engineer, they develop this, they get this PDK, right? And so this PDK contains everything. I mean, the even this modeling of the MOSFETs and all. So you just need to make a very simple circuit, maybe a very single stage amplifier, and you just simulate. It will give you a very accurate results, right? What which you will be getting after fabricating the chip, right? So now this is the job of these CAD tool companies, that they code the software, where after coding that software, they give to circuit designers and we can use that software. Of course, we have to pay them a hefty amount of fees because they have taken the pain to develop this software, but at least we have some tool with us where I don't have to take care of these hundreds of parameters, right? The software will take care of that part, right? So I hope everything is clear to you. And just to give you this pack about the packaging once more, so here I have just magnified it. So this red color that you are seeing, this is your actual silicon die chip that has been fabricated by the foundry. You package it to protect it from the outside environment, and then the legs of the package gets basically they are the connections on your PCB over. Maybe that PCB may be your motherboard of the PC, or it may be the PCB that is there on your mobile, there in your mobile, right? So now this is regarding the big picture. Now what is the output of the foundry? So again, the sources of these images have been written on the bottom. So this is a picture from the inside of the foundry. So the output of the foundry are these silicon wafers, right? So now what they do, so you can see these silicon wafers are not bare, they have something printed on them, right? So some customer must have given a big order and they must have fabricated that circuit on the silicon bare die, right? Now what they will do, they will dice it. Actually, they will cut it vertically using the maybe the laser technique or using the dicing blade. And these small dice that you will be seeing, just a minute, let me see. Yeah, these are the pictures, right? So these are the diced chips that you have. So this is a single chip, right? And so after the dicing, then they will send it to the packaging guys, and then from there you will get that black package and you can start testing your that IC, right? So now this is the output of the foundry, correct? So now this again shows the same thing. You have the wafer, you do the dicing, you package it, and what this shows just the different types of packages that are available, right? So I hope you must have seen this. If you have done some lab practicals during your BTech, maybe some analog electronics 1 course or electronic circuit analysis and design, you must have used these kind of ICs, some diode ICs, some BJT ICs, some op-amp ICs as well, right? So they come in different packages, and each package has different advantages, right? So for example, if you go to a very high circuit, for example, there are new millimeter wave bands that are there in the 5G, right? So in that you cannot use such a big kind of legs. They add a lot of inductance, so you have to use some package like this, where when you place it on the PCB, the contact area between the PCB and the package is minimum, right? So this just gives you an idea how different types of packages are existing and what is exactly the output of the foundry, right? So now this slide just shows what are the different semiconductor foundries available in the world. So as I had told you, TSMC contains almost a 60% of the market share. After that, you have the Samsung, the South Korean giant. Then you have the global foundries, you have SMIC, and you have a UMC foundry, right? So apart from this, just know that there are different foundries that exist as well, right? But the TSMC, if you ask, then the latest technology, for example, of fabricating 3 nanometer chips and all, so the yield of the TSMC is much better compared to rest of the guys, and some of them have not been able to catch up with the TSMC in terms of the technology node performance. They all of them don't have the capability to fabricate 3 nanometer chips and all, right? So this is regarding the semiconductor foundries, and this is just a zoomed view of how the silicon chip which has been wire bonded to the package actually looks, right? So now on the outside that you are seeing over here, these are the legs of the ICs that I had shown you. Just give me a second. Yeah, so these are the same legs that actually fit on the PCB, right? So these are the same legs, and inside if you see, so what are these wire bonds actually? If you look on this rectangle, then this is what the foundry fabricates. This is a bare chip, right? I don't know what this chip is actually. It may be some processor, or it may be some RF chip also. So now from this chip you need some connection to the real world, right? See, these are so small you cannot even probe them. You need a dedicated probe station just to poke the connections inside, because these are so small. Just to give you an example, they are even smaller than the size of your nail also, right? So such a small chip, you cannot poke it with the what you can say, you just cannot make the real world connection. You need to make these connections big enough so that you can start testing this IC. So that is why these wire bonds actually exist. These are the connections between the outer world where we can actually test the chip and the inner pads of the chip, right? So let's say this is the supply of the chip. This pad that you are seeing, this is the pad that exists on the chip. So this I have dedicated for the supply. Now this supply, it is the connected to the outer world through the wire bond. So I will design my PCB in such a way that I will assign some lines over there. I will directly connect the VDD to these legs through some PCB lines, right? And that VDD will reach over here, right? So that is how the chip actually works. So these legs are very helpful in making the connections with the inner part of the chip, right? So again, the source has been written over here. It has been taken from the LME, right? And now I will talk about the PDK. I have already talked a lot, but just to give you a highlight, right? So now this contains a SPICE model. Again, the same model. Just search BSIM V4, BSIM V4, and just see how many parameters are there in that model, right? So why this PDK has been made, right? Some technology files that you are seeing over here. So this technology file means that channel length only 180 nanometer, 45 nanometer, 28 nanometer, and all. And so what are this stuff, that layout, design rule check and all. So you know that if you try, let me just see if I can draw something, just a minute. Yeah, that will be much better. Yeah, so let's say this is the area of the chip that I have, right? And I have designed some circuits, right? So let's say you have a transistor like this, but this transistor does not look the same in the layout. This is just the schematic of the transistor. In the layout, it looks something different, right? It has the drain connections, right? It has the drain connections, it has the gate connections depending on how many fingers it has, right? It will look something like this. So if I want to connect two transistors, I have to use some metal lines, right? So now what are these DRC errors? So these DRC errors are actually nothing but how close two metal lines can get. So what are these metal lines? So these metal lines are nothing but these are being provided by the foundry to make the connections between the components of your circuit. So just to tell you an example, if I just take the UMC 180 nanometer example, you will have 6 metal layers that are available to the connection. That means whatever, let's say whatever different components you have, you only have the 6 metals to connect between to have this connection placed in the layout, right? And now what are these DRC rules? How close two metal lines can get and still foundry will be able to fabricate it. So let's say this is metal 1 and this is also metal 1. So now I have certain minimum spacing that is available over here, right? So let's say this is delta D. If delta D, let's say I will just take a random number, maybe 0.24 micrometer. If delta D becomes lesser than 0.24 micrometer, then the foundry will send back your circuit and it will tell you that we don't have the capability to put these two metal layers so close with respect to each other. And why is it the case? Because I told you there are process variations that happens, right? Just a minute. Yeah. So there are process variations that occur during the fabrication of the semiconductors, right? So now what are these process variations? So let's say this is the metal I have. The lower edge of the metal may look something like this. It is wiggly. It is not a straight line. And even the top edge of the lower metal, even it may look some wiggly like this, right? Something like this. So now what has happened? If you don't maintain this minimum distance of delta D, then these wiggly things will short with each other. And let's say these are VDD and VSS lines. So now what are you doing? You are actually shorting the supply with the ground, so your chip will burn because there is a short circuit between the supply, let's say 1.8 volts and 0 volts, right? So there is short circuit over there. So you just do V is equal to IR, right? R is equal to 0. So just calculate how much current will flow. Almost infinite current will flow, right? So now this has the capability to burn the chip and it always burns the chip. It always burns the chip, right? So that's why these layout design rules exist, correct? So these rules, this will be different for different foundry, because as I told you, the process variations are different across the foundry. Maybe TSMC will have a better capability to, they will just say, okay, we don't want 0.24 micrometer. Even if you keep the distance around 0.2 micrometer, we will still be able to fabricate your chip with a good reliability, right? So this is what TSMC will tell, correct? So I hope these rules, what are these rules and all, is very much clear to you. And so I had already told you, you just design the schematic, then the layout designer designs the layout, and you try to match the performance of schematic versus layout, right? So actually the layout results are very close to what you will be getting after the fabrication. The schematic results are little bit off because whatever extra parasitic capacitances are there, so you will study in the course, there are some parasitic capacitances around the transistors, so those effects are taken into account in the layout more accurately than in the schematic, right? So you will study all this stuff, and you try to relate whatever is going on in the course with this first lecture that that I am giving to you. Just come back to these slides, and as you get the information, just try to relate it with those slides, right? So this is regarding this particular PDK development, and just to give you some real world examples, just a minute. Yeah, so you can go to this Europractice IC services. What is this? Actually, IMEC is the institution which collaborates a lot with the different semiconductor foundries, right? And what they do with the they are in touch with the software companies like Cadence and Synopsys, and they are also in touch with the foundries like UMC and TSMC, right? So now they develop these PDKs. So on the left that you are seeing over here, these are the TSMC PDKs that are available. So you can pay them a price, they will give you this PDK, and based on this PDK you can start designing the circuits, right? And so on the right hand side, these are the UMC PDKs for the design that are available. So now just to compare, so this is a very state of the art, right? Not a very state of the art, but still a very recent one, 7 nanometer FinFET, right? And if you look, then this is a very old one, 130 nanometer technology that has been specially designed for this mixed signal and the RF kind of circuits, right? We will see why this exists, right? I have one slide where I will just tell you why we cannot do everything on the 7 nanometer, why we still rely on the old technologies, like 130 nanometer, 65 nanometer and 180 nanometers, right? So these are the different kind of PDKs that you will get. Of course, you have to pay them a price, and once they will release the PDK, you can start designing the circuits, right? In all of these PDKs that you are seeing, there is no single transistor, there are multiple versions of the single transistor itself, right? So as you go along the course, you will study something about the threshold voltage and all. So there exists low threshold voltage, high threshold voltage, medium threshold voltage devices. And as you study the circuits more, right, if you do the course on analog VLSI, digital VLSI, you will see the importance why so many MOSFETs and transistors exist in one particular PDK, right? So you can just go to this link. I will I have already shared the link of the YouTube channel, so I will be uploading the slides over there as well, right, in the description section. So you can go to this link and just see how many different PDKs are actually available, right? So by the way guys, if you have any doubts, then please feel free to poke me, because I'm not able to read the chat section because I'm sharing the screen, right? So just feel free to poke me at any time. Just unmute yourself and ask me doubts if you have any. So now let's look actually from where are we getting these silicon ingots. So I just told you about these wafers, and we dice these wafers, and after dicing, then they are sent for the packaging. But how these wafers are actually created, that is very important, right? Because these wafers do not exist in nature in like this. These are the silicon wafers, right? So first of all, we have to take a very raw silicon, right? From the sand, we have to generate this polysilicon nuggets. Then you have to do something called as the Czochralski process, which sir may cover in this 12 weeks. I'm not sure if he is going to cover it. If not, then there are some animation videos on the YouTube which tells you how this Czochralski process actually works. So this Czochralski process, it takes the input as this polysilicon nuggets, and it produces this highly pure silicon ingots, right? So now why we produce ingots like this? Because these are in cylindrical shape. If I just give them the cut like this, they will form into a dice kind of a semicircular or circular kind of shape, right? It's not circular exactly, maybe elliptical kind of shape, right? So now once you get this shape, then then the foundry takes this, right? And when the foundry takes this, it starts fabricating the designs of the customers that they have received, and then they design this, they dice it, and they send it back to the to packaging guys for the packaging purposes, right? So I hope this is very much clear. And one more thing, let me just turn on my pen. Yeah, so this diameter, right? So this diameter of this ingot is very, very important, right? So there exist 8-inch wafers, 12-inch wafers are also existing, right? So now why this diameter is very, very important? Because if in one shot you can fabricate a structure like this, and on the other hand, let's say there is another foundry which is not so efficient, it just fabricates this much size wafer, right? Then the advantage that the left foundry gets, when it dices, right? When it dices, it will have more number of chips, right? It will have more number of chips in one shot. So they have to do some process, right, to fabricate the designs on this silicon wafer. They have to do some photolithography. They have to buy the equipments from the very expensive companies in the Europe, and after that they will be able to fabricate those structures on the silicon wafer. But this poor foundry on the right side, it does not have so much of space, right? So it, in one shot, it is able to fabricate only these many circuits. So let's say it is able to fabricate around 100 chips, right? And this one, this poor fellow is able to fabricate around only 40 chips, right? Then what is the advantage that this foundry one has, right? So if in one shot I'm able to fabricate hundreds of chips, then the economies of scale concept comes up, right? Let's say in what the cost of doing that one shot process, let's say it was X dollars, then the cost per chip will be around X by $100 for that foundry. Whereas let's say the process cost was same X dollars, but the cost per chip over here is X by $40, right? So now why this is so important? Because the foundry which is having its capability to produce 100 chips in one shot, it will be earning a higher profit, right? So it will be having a higher margin because it is able to fabricate 100 chips rather than just 40 chips. So this foundry will make a lot of profit compared to this right side foundry, and that is why you want this diameter to actually increase, right? Can I make it 40-inch wafer? Can I make it like 100-inch wafer? Then just remind yourself that you have studied physics in your class 11th and 12th. If you start making so thin wafers and their diameters are so huge, right, then the wafer will break because of its own weight. So it will just crack up from the middle and you will have nothing then, right? So there is a particular limit how much stress this wafer can actually bear. According to that, there is a particular limit of how big this silicon ingots diameter can get. The bigger the diameters, of course the foundry will make a lot of profit, but it should not break from the middle because you are wasting the wafers and you are wasting the cost on your raw materials, which are not even being which are not even being used to make the chips, because they are just breaking from the middle, right? So I hope this small economics concept is very much clear. Let me turn on the laser pointer again. Yeah. So now let's look into some global semiconductor supply chain. Now why this is important? Because you are into the semiconductors course, right? And you should be able to answer why there was a crisis in the supply chain of the semiconductor, where the choke point exists, and why the automotive market went down because of the semiconductor crisis that happened, right? So now let's look what are the different players and where do they exist actually, right? So now let's first look at US, right? So now what is the contribution of the US in the global supply chain? They have taken the example for the smartphone processor, right? So now the companies that you see, right, the Synopsys, Cadence and all, if you look, they are listed on the US stock exchange. The Cadence especially originated from the US itself, right? So these companies which actually make the CAD tools and help and they provide the fabless companies like Qualcomm and all, they provide these tools so that these guys can design the circuits and they can make their chips like the Wi-Fi chip, the 4G 3G chips, right? And they can make the profit out of it, right? So these tools are actually being enabled by the companies like Cadence, Synopsys, right? So and so these companies exist in the US, and there are many different design firms also that exist in the US. For example, you must have heard about the Intel, Qualcomm, Texas Instrument. So all these big giants, they have been originated from the US itself, right? So the design firms as well as the firms which are designing the CAD tools, so both of them are present in the US, right? And there is only one thing, for example, that there is the statement that has been written: the United States firms provide software for the chip designs. These are the Cadence and Synopsys software which may rely on the intellectual property license from the Europe, right? So just to give you a hint, just try searching about the ARM company, ARM, and just see how many companies actually take the license from this ARM for this processor architecture and all, right? And just Google it and you will get the answer why the ARM, why all of the companies take the processor architecture from the ARM itself, and they pay this intellectual property fees to ARM company, ARM, right? Now let's look at the equipment companies. Now what are these equipment companies actually? I told you about the semiconductor foundry. Let me just turn on the pen for a moment. Yeah. So I told you about the semiconductor foundry, right? Let's say TSMC and all. Now they need some equipment to whatever customer designs. Let's say here is a Qualcomm, right? So now they have given the, let's say, 4G chip for the fabrication to TSMC, right? And now they told foundry that I have given you a GDS file. I have given you a GDS file. I want the silicon die to be fabricated according to this GDS file, right? So on this silicon wafer, they have to fabricate the structures, right? Somebody has to do something to fabricate these structures, right? So somebody has to do something, or they cannot come from the air, right? So there exist photolithography machines. Photolithography machines, right? I guess sir will touch upon this topic briefly in these 12 weeks, right? So there exist photolithography machines, and what are the job of these photolithography machines? So they help you print the pattern on the silicon wafer according to the design that has been given by the customer, right? See, there is not a one single customer, right? There, the foundry may receive different orders from Qualcomm, from Apple, from maybe companies like Intel, or maybe some different company, right? So they should have that flexibility that whatever pattern they want to print, they should be able to print on the silicon wafer, and for that they need a photolithography machine. And who will provide this photolithography machine? So most of the companies from the Europe have the capability. They have designed it to the perfection that these machines are, most of the market share is dominated by the Europe, right? Especially if you ask me, then if the, let's say if the TSMC wants to fabricate a processor in 3 nanometer or 5 nanometer technology nodes, right? You must have heard these technology nodes, right? They need EUV photolithography machine, ultra extreme ultraviolet, right? So now this producing this photolithography machine, making this photolithography machine that is capable of having this EUV capability itself is very difficult. And ASML is the company, right? ASML is the company that is present in the Netherlands that commands 100% market share for this EUV photolithography machines. I will just tell you what is the cost of this machine. I have some slides for that, right? But just remember that there exists some company in the Netherlands, right, that has the 100% of the market share for this EUV photolithography capability, right? So now this one company I just told you. Another company that you will find is I will write on the left side, is a Carl Zeiss. I guess it's a German company, and what it does, it produces the lens. Now why do you need a complete company to produce such lens? Can't our Lenskart do that, right? So now they have to produce lens up to such a precision that other companies are not able to do it. And why do you need these lenses? I will just give you an example, right? If this is a lens and let's say this is my silicon wafer, right? I have to point exactly over here. Let's say I shine a light from here, then you know from your class 12th and 11th physics that it because of the lens, the light will get concentrated to a particular point over here, right? So now because of these lenses are used along with the photolithography machine to print a pattern at the exact spot in the semiconductor wafer. I don't even want inaccuracy over here because this distance is very small, right? In the GDS file has been provided to me by the customer, and I want to make sure that at exact this location only I am able to shine the light perfectly. So I need a lens for that, and Carl Zeiss is the company which is present in the Germany which makes these lenses. Another company that helps in making the semiconductor equipments is the Lam Research. I'm just giving you an overview. You can of course Google it and just see how what are the different products of this company produce and who are their customers, right? So all these companies, they are actually originated from the Europe, right? So now we have seen the equipment based companies, we have seen the design. Now let's look at the materials, right? So what has been written over here? So silicon is mined and refined in the United States and then processed into wafers in Japan and South Korea. Now why do we need a separate processing? Because United States is still not capable to produce the silicon with 99.999% purity. This is the amount of purity that will be required to ensure that there are no defects that are present in the silicon wafer, and I can take the design of the customer and fabricate the patterns on this silicon wafer, right? So let's say the silicon comes from the United States, or you know that the biggest production of the silicon happens in China as well, right? but the processing that is making this silicon ultra pure, this happens mostly in Japan and South Korea, right? So now this is the role of the Japan and South Korea for doing this ultra processed wafers. And who will be the customers? Of course, the TSMC, UMC, Global Foundries. Every foundry that you can think of, all of them needs ultra pure silicon wafers. And if Japan is able to do it, then it will sell it to different foundries, right? So now the let's look at, we have looked at the materials, let's look at the manufacturing. So we know chips are, where is this TSMC present? Of course, in name itself, the Taiwan Semiconductors Manufacturing Company. So it is present in Taiwan, right? And now if you look, after doing this manufacturing, the chips are packaged and they will be sent to Malaysia, right? They will be sent to Malaysia for the testing and packaging. And once the chips have been packaged, right, so eventually they will be assembled into smartphones in mainland China, right? So the packaging and assembly and all, the packaging and testing of the ICs will happen in the Malaysia maybe, and they will be, let's say you have 3-4 kind of different ICs, and let's say your phone requires around 30 or 40 ICs like this, right? So all this assembly will happen in China. You must have heard about the Foxconn, right? The contract manufacturer of the Apple, right? It helps in the contract manufacturing. It produces the Apple iPhones in a huge number. What it is doing, it is exactly doing this. It is taking the ICs from whatever Apple wants, and it is actually putting it in the phones, right? So you need a lot of manpower to do this. So Foxconn is one of the example for that. So we have covered everything now in the global semiconductor supply chain, from the design to equipment to the materials to the manufacturing. What are the different areas in the world which are involved in these different processes, right? So I hope till this point it is very much clear to you. Please feel free to ask me doubts if you have any. So this was the EUV photolithography machine that I was telling you about. UV photolithography machine, and this image, of course this machine is from ASML, right? So now I just want you to unmute yourself and just tell me the cost of this machine. Let's do the guesswork, and please unmute yourself and just tell me the cost of this machine. How much are you guessing actually?
Some clues?
Yeah, some crores. Can you just say me some numbers? Maybe I will just write them down in the right side. Okay, 2 crores, 100 crores. Okay. Okay, great. So we got few numbers over here. So now let me check. Okay, 2 crores and 100 crores. So actually the cost of this machine is freaking 1400 to 1600 crores. Just one machine, huh? Just one machine. Around 1400 to 1600 crores. And just to prove it to you, so this article has been taken, the snapshot has been taken from Analytics India magazine. So you can see the cost. The each EUV lithography system made by the ASML costs around USD $200 million, right? So even if I take the exchange rate of 80 rupees per dollar, right? So now you just multiply 80 with 200. How much it will come? Around no, I am doing something wrong. Wait, $200 million, right? So I have to take this 1 million, right? So 1 million means 10 lakhs. Then I have to multiply it with the 80, right? So this will come out to be something like 1400 to 1600 crores. So this is the cost that you have to bear to set up a foundry if you want some advanced customers, right? And who needs this kind of chips? So whatever companies who are designing the processors, right? So who are the companies? So maybe Apple is designing its own chips right now, right? So A13, A14, right? So these chips, these are the processor chips, these are the digital chips, right? So they want the power consumption of the processor to be as low as possible, so that the customer can they can save the customer's battery. So if I lower my power consumption, then if my phone if it is used to last maybe 12 hours in a single charge, then if I lower the power consumption of the processor, then my phone may even last maybe 16 hours, right? So customer will be happy. I will be able to put that my phone lasts 16 hours. The state of the art in the market is just 12 hours. So people will start buying my mobile, and of course I will get a lot of revenue and profit, right? So this is why all people want their chips to have reduced power consumption. But to have this reduced power consumption, it comes at a cost, right? they have to go to the TSMCs, which has the capability to fabricate the processors in the 3 nanometer and 5 nanometer technology nodes, right? They have to go them. These processes are extremely costly, like unless and until you are giving a very huge order, these it will cost them a lot per chip. For example, if I tell TSMC to fabricate the chip in 28 nanometer, and if I tell them to fabricate it 3 nanometer, right? And if I just tell them to fabricate 100 chips, even here itself, if I tell them to fabricate 100 chips, then I can ensure you that the cost of these 100 chips on the right hand side that you're seeing over here, right? Just a minute, somebody wants to join. Yeah, the cost of this chip, 100 chips, will be at least 5 or 6 times easily higher than the chips on the left side. Now, why did this happen? Because the 3 nanometer process is an extremely complex and extremely costly. And why is it costly? I just told you how much it costs to just get a one machine from the ASML, right? So now, if I want the cost per chip to reduce, I want to not give the order of 100 chips, but I want to place the order of 1000 chips. If I place the order of 1000 chips, only then I can match the cost per chip with what I was getting in the 28 nanometer. So so I will just write in a rough manner maybe. So if I fabricate the 1000 chips, right, then the cost per chip in 3 nanometer may match with chip in 28 nanometer. This is just a rough number. I don't know exact number. I'm just telling you, right? So now, just to give you an idea of how much big the order Apple gives to TSMC, I still remember it came in the headline when the Apple gave its order for the latest iPhone, right? The TSMC's slot for this latest technology node, I don't know what was the technology node, maybe 5 nanometer or maybe 7 nanometer, I don't know exactly. So it got blocked for the 6 months. That means just because Apple placed a very big order for their maybe A12 processors to TSMC, the order was so huge that the foundry needed almost 6 months to process that order, and they could not take orders from other companies on this particular technology node, 7 nanometer or 5 nanometer maybe. I don't remember the exact headline at what technology it was, but I'm just giving you a number how big order the Apple must have placed to block the TSMC's technology node for 6 months. It could not even take the orders from any other customers, right? And as you know, Apple is the biggest customer of the TSMC, right? So these are just some economics that I just wanted you to know because you are doing the semiconductor course, right? And it is my job to give you this idea, correct? So now this was regarding the ASMC, and now let's look what are the different jobs that are actually created by this industry, because we all are searching for the knowledge. We of course we want to make our concepts clear. We want to have the inner satisfaction that my concepts of the semiconductors are completely clear, but you also want a very good high paying job, right? So now let's look at what are the different jobs that are created by this semiconductor industry. So the first, device modeling engineer, I already told you, they whatever devices they get, maybe they must have got the FinFET, something new is coming up like gate all around FET, right? GAFET is coming up. They must have even got the MOSFET. So their job is to do the complete modeling of this MOSFET, completely characterize it, and ensure that what are the number of parameters I need to have in this MOSFET to model it accurately, right? The PDK development, we have discussed about this extensively, so I won't go into details right now because we have almost spent 10 or 12 minutes on this PDK itself. Then the next one is the analog circuit designer guy, right? So this is the guy. So if you have done some experiments with the op-amp, you must have seen the op-amp ICs in your analog electronics course. You must have maybe plotted its frequency response. You must have designed maybe some inverting amplifier, right? You must have designed something like inverting amplifier and all. So now that was just a black IC. It had some legs. It had some legs, right? So now inside it there was a chip, the bare chip that must have been fabricated by some foundry, right? So the analog circuit designer, they design these circuits like the op-amps and all. So these are not very high frequency circuit. They will be a baseband. So you can just consider the maybe circuits which are operating at maybe less than 50 to 100 megahertz, right? So they come under the domain of the analog circuits. So there is one circuit called as the band gap reference. You can just Google it. I'm just giving you few terms. This is not a circuit design course, right? Now in the analog itself, there is some different domain called as the power management, right? So what are these power management? So if you open your mobile, right? If you open your mobile, there are almost 30 LDOs that are present. Now, what are these LDOs? So these are the low dropout voltage regulators. Now, why do I need voltage regulator in my chip? So if you just take the screen of your mobile, it has a display, right? It has a display. It may be OLED display or some different display, right? So now this display needs a supply. It needs a supply of maybe plus 20 volts and minus 20 volts. But I just have one lithium ion battery in my mobile which can just give me how much? 3.3 volts. Now it is my job to generate this to generate this plus 20 and minus 20 volts from this 3.3 volt itself. I don't care how I do it, but I have to do it very efficiently. I don't want to burn a lot of power, or else customer will complain that my phone is not lasting long, its battery is very poor, right? So I have to take care of this. So now that is why you need different voltage regulators. So if you need to generate 20 volts, then you will need something like maybe boost converter, right? So when your V out is greater than V in, so output voltage required is greater than V in, you may need boost converter. If you want to generate maybe 1.8 volt from 3.3 volt, then you may need maybe just buck converter or even a buck converter, or there may be some cascaded connection of this low dropout regulator and this buck converter, right? This low dropout regulator that I told you, it contains the op amp, right? Again, the analog circuit designer will come into his desk and he will start designing the op amp that has been required for this particular what you can say power management application. Then there are digital circuit design engineers, guys, right? What are their jobs? So they design the processors and all the digital chips and all that you have studied, right? The processor, I can also make a sub classification and include the memory chips as well. So you must have studied about the RAMs and ROMs. You must have at least heard about it, the cache memory, RAMs and ROMs. So these require, so again, they are designed from the MOSFETs and transistors only, right? The only thing is you just cannot keep on reducing the channel length. I mean, if you are fabricating the processor at 3 nanometer, you just cannot do the same for the memory. There are certain limitations that actually exist, and if you study memory in depth, you will understand that why I cannot fabricate a memory chip in 3 nanometer, right? So you can just Google about it. You will also get the answers, or maybe in future lectures, I will try to cover it actually, right? So now this is regarding the digital design circuit, digital circuit designer. Now comes the RF circuit designer, right? So I have an extensive slide on this, like what is the job of this RF circuit designer. So I will just give you a few examples. Your mobile is able to receive the Bluetooth signals at 2.4 gigahertz, right? It is able to receive the your 4G signals around 900 megahertz carrier frequency, right? It is also able to receive the Wi-Fi signal which is present around 2.4 gigahertz. It is also able to receive the GPS signal that may be present around something like 1.09 gigahertz. I don't remember the frequency exactly, but something like 1.0 gigahertz or something. This is the band for maybe this is the band for GPS, right? So these are all the RFs. So when you receive these kind of high frequency circuits, high frequency signals, you need some circuits actually to process them very efficiently. So they come into the category called as the front end modules, right? So I will tell you, I have a slide and we will go over there and we will see why there is a special requirement for it. So you need to receive these high frequency signals, and you need some kind of circuitry to process them actually, right? And you also have to make sure that when these signals are actually of high carrier, you actually down convert them to maybe some baseband frequency, or maybe the same frequency, this 50 to 100 megahertz, so that rest of the processing can be done at lower frequency, right? So this is the job of the RF circuit. The verification engineer exists everywhere, even in the RF, analog, digital, right? So but the most of the jobs in India for the verification engineer comes into the category of the under the digital domain, right? And the CAD engineer, I have already told you, right? The synopsis and the cadence, guys. So somebody needs to code the software, and you know, wherever there is a software, there will come certain bugs. And if you want to include something new, for example, this synopsis and the cadence, just like you had different versions for GTA San Andreas game, right? So you need to upgrade your software, and you need to be at the cutting edge so that your competitor does not beat you in the market share, right? So now you need to have the upgradations, different versions coming from this software. So the job of the CAD engineer is to include those include those upgradation, change the software a little bit, tweak the code, and solve the bugs that will exist in those softwares of the companies like Cadence and the Synopsys, right? So these were the different jobs that were actually created by the semiconductor industries. And just to give you that, just to tell you that I'm not making up this stuff, I just went to the LinkedIn and I just searched this TSMC jobs, right? So you can see the PDK engineer job exists over here, the CAD engineer job exists over here, right? It also, they also require the AI and ML engineer. Now, why the hell the foundry requires the AI and ML engineer? So I told you that they work very closely with the they have to have this PDK, right? They have to have this PDK developed, and the foundry faces the process variations, right? So now they have a lot of data. Like let's say I'm fabricating maybe in 180 nanometer, maybe some chips in 65 nanometer, maybe some chips in 28 nanometer. So I can actually see how these process variations are actually affecting 180 nanometer, 65 nanometer, 28 nanometer. Maybe on the data that I get on these process variations, I can perform some very basic kind of regression analysis. See, I'm not an expert in AI and ML. I haven't even done the basic course, but I just know few terms, right? So whatever data I get, so I may do some very basic kind of regression analysis just to model these process variations, because the moment I am able to model these process variations, the PDK engineer will take care of these process variations, and he will include those process variations maybe in the model itself, right? So that the customer does not have to face the heat of the process variations happening in the foundry, right? So that is the reason they need those AI and ML engineers as well, right? Again, you can see the process integration engineer, this R&D engineer, N2 PD engineer, right? So you can see these jobs actually exist. You can go and search, look into these jobs. Not only TSMC, you can go into the Qualcomm. I will suggest go into the Texas Instruments, right? Go into the analog devices, right? Just see what are the different jobs that are actually existing in the market, and you will see that most of them will have the profiles which will be actually matching with the few points that have few job listings that I have highlighted over here, right? So I hope this is very much clear to you. So now again, this just slides explain the some of the companies that are actually working in the field, right? So the TSMC is your foundry, where the all the chips are fabricated. They get their equipment from the companies from the Europe, like the Lam Research I told you, right? The ASML I told you. You can also include maybe Carl Zeiss over here, right? So the Carl Zeiss actually, if you look the photolithography machine in in the photolithography machine itself, you need those lenses and all, right? So now you can also tell that the Carl Zeiss must be supplying the lenses to ASML as well, right? So actually the Carl Zeiss must be supplying the lenses to ASML as well. So that's why maybe Carl Zeiss is not written over here. So now there are certain companies which have their own foundries, right? You know about Intel, it has its own foundry. Even the Samsung has its own foundry. You can also include Texas Instruments as well, right? And now what are these companies? So these are the Synopsys and your ARM companies which provides the electronic design automation. So this is nothing but the EDA tools. They are in the short form, they are called as EDA tools, because they help you automate the electronic design. You don't need to rely on your hand calculated results, right? How will you hand calculate the hundreds of parameters? That is almost impossible, right? Now on opposite to these companies like Samsung and Intel, there exist companies which does not have their own fabrication plant. That is, they does not have the foundry, right? So what these companies do, they own the IP, they will design the processor, they will design the RF chips, right? They will send it to fabrication to companies like TSMC. They will get back the chips, right? And whatever chips they will have, they will look something like this as the end product, right? And now ultimately these ICs may go into the Apple's iPhone, correct? So Apple's iPhone will contain a lot of different chips from a lot of different companies. I have the photo of the tear down of the Apple's iPhone 12 Pro Max and as well as the 11. So we will look into detail what actually is this. And now if you look over here, what are these different companies? Even I don't have a lot of knowledge, but they help automate the testing of the packages that you get maybe, right? So now, and what are these? These are the companies which do the job of the assembly and testing. So many of these companies may be present in Malaysia, right? You can try to just search about these companies. I don't have a lot of expertise about the what these companies actually do, right? So I hope this supply chain is completely clear to you, and you won't be confused after this lecture, like why are you studying this course, right? So now guys, what we will do, we will just take a short break for 5 minutes maybe. I need to freshen up myself and drink some water. So I'm just stopping the presentation for 5 minutes. We will be back at 5 p.m. sharp. Thank you.
Yeah, great. It's working fine. Great.
Yeah. So what we have seen till now, we have seen the entire global supply chain of the semiconductors. We have seen the different companies, the different jobs that will be created by the semiconductor industry. Why it may reach $1 trillion market size in year 2030, and why you all have a very bright opportunity to enter into this industry and grab onto this growing field and also make a handsome money for yourself, right? So now let's look at the next part, that is I told you, right, we will be seeing like why the automotive crisis happened because of the semiconductor. So first of all, just to get an idea of the crisis, we may first have to look at how much semiconductor and electronics is actually present in your modern car, right? So now just by some estimates, it actually estimated that there are different almost 1400 semiconductors. Maybe you can call them as a ICs or sensors, whatever you want to call. There almost exists 1400 different varieties, for they will be used for different functions, and some of the locations are marked over here. So maybe just to give you a few highlights, like for the case of the safety, you have to have the airbag controls, right? So somebody needs to check the some sensors should be there which will check whether the car is in the very trouble mode, I mean whether it has hit to some pole or maybe some different car, and by judging that jerk, the airbag should pops up, right? So now it needs some kind of sensor, it needs a control from the central computer to send some commands so that the airbag will be released, right? And in the case of the infotainment, you have the driver display. Almost all the modern cars have these driver displays. In the case of the audio video, you have the nowadays in most of the cars you have the audio control from from the steering wheel itself, right? And if you talk about the electrical, then the lighting systems, and if you talk about the fuel, then the fuel sensor should be there. It will be judging how much of the tank is actually full, and based on that sensor level, it will actually display you that almost 70% of your fuel tank is actually empty, right? So that you can judge, okay, after maybe traveling 150 or 200 kilometers, I have to refuel my car, right? So in all these cases, you need those different sensors, and those different sensors are actually made up of semiconductor, may not be fabricated in a very latest technology node like 3 nanometer, 5 nanometer, because these are not pure digital circuits, right? These are the sensors. They have to sense a real world, maybe pressure, maybe temperature, maybe fuel level or something, and only after doing that it has to convert it into electrical signals, right? So this is an electronic circuitry, and it must be fabricated somewhere in the foundry itself, right? So for all these functions, right, it needs the semiconductors. Now if you have shortages for these itself, right, then how will you incorporate all these sensors? And if all these sensors are almost a necessity for the modern car, right? So if the car customer, let's say maybe Mahindra or maybe Hyundai would have told you, sir, we won't be able to provide you these audio video controls, we won't be able to provide you this fuel level display that is there in front of you, we may not be able to provide you the airbag controls, that is of course a nonsense. Nobody will buy a car like that, correct? So that is the reason why, even if the some of the sensors are not available, but if they are important, you just cannot put your car in the market for sale without those sensors, right? So just because there was a choke, that is a bottleneck in the semiconductor industries, those sensors could not be fabricated in the same quantity, and because they could not be fabricated in the same quantity, the less number of cars were available in the market which had all those sensors inbuilt in them, and only those cars were able to get themselves into the market and for the sale in the company, right? The rest of the cars, they could not be entered, they cannot enter into the market because of the shortage of the sensors. And now just to give you an idea of how much electronics we have actually embedded in a car, in year 2000, out of the total cost of the car, maybe let's say the cost of the car is 10 lakh rupees, right? So electronic almost accounted for 18% of that cost in the year 2000, right? So that cost increased gradually. Around year 2020, the electronics in your car almost accounts for the 40% of the total car's cost. So let's say somebody from here, let's say he wants to buy an SUV, maybe a Kia car, maybe Sonet, let's say the cost is around 18 lakhs or 20 lakhs, I don't know exactly, but almost 40% of that 18 lakhs, the cost is being that cost is only because of the electronics only, not because of the mechanical structure of the car, right? So that is how highly equipped the car is with the electronics, and that's why they have written that the car is nothing but a computer on wheels, right? So you can see from this itself, and almost from this number, almost 1400 different varieties of semiconductors, sensors, you can say, or ICs, they exist in your car, right? So now if I want to very simplify it, right? So now you must have heard, like, let's talk something very realistic and which is a very latest development, right? So we all want self-driving cars to be there as quick as possible. So now this is the image that has been taken from this IEEE innovation board. So now on top, that what you are seeing is the lidar sensor, right? What the lidar does, it sends a light pulses even in a fraction of a second, it may send thousands of light pulses around your environment, right? And whatever received signal it will receive, so from those received signal itself, it will try to map the environment, right? Now why the radar cannot do that job? Because this is a photonic circuit, right? It is emitting out the light actually, and you can see that if you want to differentiate between the two objects, then your whatever you are sending needs to have a high bandwidth. Now the radar, you can say it will only have a maybe bandwidth of 4 gigahertz, but this lidar is a high resolution. I mean, it has a so much high resolution that even if the 3 people are standing very close by, it will be even able to determine the shape of their chappal also. It is that sensitive, but the radar will just tell you that there is only one big body that is standing in front of the car, right? So that is how I will differentiate the lidar with the radar, right? And all you can see is there are video cameras, rear cameras are there, some ultrasonic sensors which are required for the parking are there, and there sits the main big boss, that is the central computer, right? Now why I'm showing you this car, because of course there is a trend of the self-driving cars, right? It is based on the AI and ML also, like, and how quickly and how much computation we can do in a very quick amount of time. Your car, let's say, is driving with the 100 kilometers per hour speed, and let's say some dog or something comes up very quickly. Your car has to do the operation very quickly. It cannot take a time for processing, right? So that's why you need a lot of computing power present in your car, but it should not be so much that it will drain your battery immediately, right? So these are certain trade-offs that you have to play. And why I have bought this picture in front of you, because I'm just telling you that out of all the sensors that are present around the car, all that information will be electrically converted and it will be going into the central computer of your car, right? When the information goes, it is the job of the central computer to get this information and tell the car to perform, to tell the car what is the next action that it has to perform, whether it has to generate certain sound because certain car has came too close in the other lane with respect to my car, or whether it has to do the emergency braking because driver cannot do that and some dog has came up in front of my car and my car is running up with a speed of 80 km per hour. So I need to do a very fast computing over there, right? And the moment you tell me the word of very fast computing, I will think only in terms of the technology node, right? So the moment you have to design the digital circuits, the digital processor, then and you want it to be as fast as possible, I will make sure that I will use the latest technology node, maybe 3 nanometer, 5 nanometer, so that I can put a lot more transistors in the same amount of area and I can give more power to my processor, more computing power to my processor, right? So this is the reason why I just told you this image first, that there are a lot of different sensors that are present and all this information will come to your central computer only, maybe certain through net, maybe through some network. So if you want, you can study about this CAN protocol that you are seeing over here, controller area network, right? It will give you an idea of how the information travels to the central computer, and this is the job of the central computer, and this is where our actually the VLSI lies, this central computer, right? Of course, around all the sensors also, there should be someone who will be designing the circuits to convert the temperature into the electrical information and all, or maybe to convert the pressure into electrical. But if you want me to ask where the latest technology will be involved, then it will be involved in making this central computer as fast as possible, that is by bringing it to the lowest technology node possible. And that is why the foundries are racing to towards the 2 nanometer, and somebody saying also 1 nanometer, right? This is the same reason, because they can capture a lot of market of this, right? So this was regarding the cars, right? Now as promised, we will look into the Apple's iPhone, that is Pro 12 Max tear down. And the reason for doing this is just to tell you from how many different companies actually the Apple takes ICs, and the whichever companies are supplying ICs to this Apple phone, right? You can be sure that actually they must be earning a lot of revenue, because Apple sells a lot of iPhone, maybe the highest number of phones sold by any company till now, right? So if your IC, whatever, let's say you make a startup and Apple agrees to buy those ICs from you, then you are sure that you will be rich very soon, right? So now the first thing that I will be showing you, just a minute. Of course, this is the A14. This is the Apple's own proprietary product, right? They have their own inbuilt chip, inbuilt hardware design team, right? So just to tell you, by the way, the Apple, the Google, as well as Tesla, right? If you don't know, then they have their own hardware design guys. Now, for example, if they want some processor, they have the enough capability to design those processors in-house itself. They may not need to go to companies like Nvidia or Intel and tell them that I want certain specifications on my processor. They have their own in-house team, and this in-house team is capable to produce this kind of ICs. And you can see in their iPhone itself, this A14 was designed by their own in-house team, and it was being fabricated by the TSMC, maybe in the latest technology node, right? Available at that particular time, right? So now if you ask me to explain you some different components, then I will tell you that some of the power management units. What are the power management? So from the 3.3 volt available in your lithium ion battery, you may have to generate almost 15 or 20 different voltages, right? So this is the job of the power management guy, to make sure that these 15-20 voltages are available in the mobile, because in the mobile you have that display. You may want to generate different voltages for that 3D accelerometer, not accelerometer, yeah, that gyroscope that is present in your mobile, right? It also needs some voltage and that can be done by some different companies. But over here we can see that Apple has also designed this power management IC by themselves. Then you can see that flash LED driver that I was the flash LED driver, it has been taken from the Texas Instruments. Again, the Texas Instrument, they have taken this 250 milliampere 1.6 volt LDO regulator. Again, it comes under the domain of power management, right? So now let me talk about something different. Yeah, this is the boost converter that I was talking about. So they wanted a 16 volt voltage that needs to be generated. So they contacted Texas Instrument and they took the IC from there, right? So these are the different ICs that are going into this Apple iPhone. If you talk about the audio amplifier, right, then it takes it from the Cirrus Logic companies. Let me see if I can find it. I had read it somewhere. Just a minute. Maybe here, yeah, the 21 number that I'm just highlighting now. So you can see the audio amplifiers, right? Whatever you are talking and all, like if you are hearing something from your phone, then the audio amplifier has that job, right? It needs to produce the sound which is as original as possible without making any distortions, right? So now the job of so these ICs have been brought from the Cirrus Logic. Let me see if I have the RF chips that are there. Let me see. Okay, RF chips are not here. Maybe I will move on to the next slide. Maybe in the iPhone 11 Pro breakdown, I must be having that. Yeah. So you can see the Skyworks GPS, the SAW LNA, right? So this SAW is nothing but actually filter, and this LNA is designed such that it receives these GPS signals that are coming from the satellite, right? Their power is so low that first of all you have to amplify them before doing anything. That's why you put the LNA. So you can see again, just a minute. Let me see something different. Yeah, they have taken this 2G, 3G, 4G modem from the Intel. They have the some circuits over here which are for 2G, 3G, 4G. Again, they have taken from the Intel itself. The transmitter. This is the transmitter and RX means receiver. So the transmitter receivers for the 2G, 3G and 4G, they have bought these ICs from the Intel. The power amplifier was designed by the Skyworks, right? You can see over here. This PM is power amplifier. And why do you need a power amplifier? So you need a power amplifier because let's say this is your mobile and this is your base station. This is from where you will be receiving the signals. If you want something to be sent from your mobile to the base station, you may be standing at almost a kilometer of distance and you still want your signal to reach to the base station, right? So that's why you need to boost the power of the signal. That's why you need a power amplifier over here, right? So I hope this is clear to you. Again, I'm just giving a different tier down examples just to show you how many different companies are actually involved to construct a single iPhone, right? And how many companies are getting the business just because iPhone is existing in today's world, right? So now this is done, and now the question that I had asked you, like, why do we need so many new different semiconductor devices? I mean, why can't we do everything, let's say, with 7 nanometer FinFET? Why we cannot do that, right? So now this slide will help you in answering those questions. So what I divided over here, so this image that you are seeing over here, it has been taken from the IEEE Solid State Circuits magazine. The article was written by Dr. Venumadhav Bhagwatullah. So he's currently an engineer at Samsung in USA. So now what you can see over here, there are these are what I call as the RF circuits. So these are nothing but your front end modules. So FEM means front end modules. I must have told you this some slides back as well, right? So these are your front end modules. Now what is the job of this? When you are receiving the signal of maybe 2.4 gigahertz or something, right? Correct? So first of all, you have to, when the signal is received, you have to amplify it using the LNA. You have to give it to the next block, right? And you know all the processing happens in the processor. So this is where your digital signal processor lies. So for the people who have done the DSP course and all, this is where your the DSPs that you may have seen, the FIR logic. There were two kind of design that you must have seen, FIR and IR, right, in the DSP course. So this is where the DSP lies actually, and whatever processing you have to do it digitally, because digital is very much efficient and it is very powerful, right? We have so much of capability now to do all kinds of processing in your mobile. So now first of all, I have to convert this 2.4 gigahertz into a baseband frequency that is maybe around less than 50 megahertz, right? So that down converter, this mixer circuit that you are seeing, it exists over there. Then some filter is there now, but this, you know that this processor only operates on the digital data, that is 0 1 0 1 0 1. I cannot give analog voltages to this DSP like something like 1.3 volt sinusoid. I mean, I just cannot give a signal like this to my processor. It will just go crazy. I want to digitize this signal first. So I need a analog to digital converter that you are seeing over here, so that it converts it into a digital data on which my processor can operate, and I can do a very fast processing and operation in the DSP itself, right? So now this is the architecture that I just wanted you to explain. Now this DSP that you are seeing, this DSP has to be very, very powerful. Of course, not so powerful that it will drain the battery of the mobile in 1 hour, but it has to be capable enough to do all the processing in very fast time, right? So if I want a very fast processor, and I want a heavy computation to be done by this processor, then I will try to design it maybe in 5 nanometer or 7 nanometer technology, right? Because I can fit more number of transistors in the same amount of area. That means I can do more number of computations, right, in the same amount of time. That is why DSP has to be designed in a very, very low technology. Now what about these power amplifiers and the LNAs, right? So see, this power amplifier that I am telling you, it may need to transmit 1 watt of power. It may need to transmit 1 watt of power, and the swing that the transistor will see. So of course these power amplifiers have been built by the transistor only, right? So that at the output of that transistor, so let's say this is my MOSFET over here. So at the output, I will see a very, very huge swing, which is not traditional, right? It is not what you can say, it is not a conventional problem. It is a very high swing. This swing is so high that my transistor may even break down. I need to ensure my transistor has the sufficient breakdown voltage to handle this kind of swing, or else this power amplifier will just burn my transistor, right? So to make sure that this device has a sufficient breakdown voltage, what if I try to take this 7 nanometer circuit and just design my power amplifier using that? Then I will tell you that as you go lower in the technology nodes, right, your breakdown voltage, if you don't do anything special, your breakdown voltage also reduces. What do I mean by breakdown voltage reduces? So if let's say particular transistor was breaking, let's say for maybe 2 volt peak to peak swing, and if I go into the 5 nanometer technology, then that transistor may even break if I just apply a 1 volt peak to peak swing, and that is not good for my transistor. That is a power amplifier, right? So now to design these circuits efficiently, I have to move away from this 7 nanometer, and I have to design these circuits at such a technology node that this transistor remains operational, right? It does not break down after seeing such a huge voltage, and the whatever technology that I am using, it is actually optimized for these kind of designs, right? See, of course I'm worried about the power that this processor consumes. Of course I'm worried about the power that this PA consumes. But first of all, my PA has to work. My power amplifier has to work, right? So that's why you can see that some of the processes that you are seeing, RF, right? RF and RF. So that's why some of the processes are just optimized to design these RF circuits, right? So we just cannot rely on the FinFET, which are very state of the art, maybe 5 nanometer, 7 nanometer, to design these power amplifiers, because they cannot handle such a huge amount of power, right? Just to tell you one thing again, I will of course tell you this thing in maybe some future lectures, but there is each amplifiers adds certain amount of noise as well, right? So this LNA that you are seeing, your signal is so low, this swing that you are seeing over here, it may be even less than some microvolts. I'm talking about 2 volt peak to peak at the power amplifier. I'm talking about microvolts at the receiver's input. This may be coming from some GSM base station, or it may even come from the GPS, right? So I have to make sure that my amplifier does not add a lot of noise to it. This process that you are seeing, the 5 nanometer, 7 nanometer, it is not optimized for that noise. It is not optimized for that noise. I don't want these amplifiers to give me a lot of loss. I don't want this amplifier to add a lot of noise. So that's why there exists certain RF processes. You can see those names in the PDK itself, RF and RF, right? 7 nanometer FinFET, there is no RF written over here, right? So that's why certain PDKs exist which are actually optimized for the RF operation, and you can see them in the Europractice IC services website, whose link I have already given in the previous slide, right? So This is the reason why we just don't rely on this 7 nanometer, 5 nanometer. And if somebody tells you that because of the 5 nanometer and 7 nanometer, the market for the 65 nanometer or 180 nanometer will just go away, then they are clear cut wrong, because certain devices has to be designed in certain technology, because they give the maximum performance for my power amplifier and the low noise amplifier, right? So I hope this confusion is very much clear. Of course, this 5 nanometer, 7 nanometer is very good, but for what purposes? For the processing, the DSP. If you ask me to design the processor where I can train my neural network, then of course I will go on the very latest technology node, because it has a lot of power available, right? So some of you guys may be interested in the crypto mining and all, right? So they have a very big server. They have a complete infrastructure built for those, where there will be supercomputers and all. Of course they want a very high computing power and all. So of course they will get the chips which will be designed at the very latest technology nodes, right? But for some part where I want the RF circuits, that is power amplifier, low noise amplifier, and these switches, matrix, and the filters, I just cannot do it with the 7 nanometer, because they don't give me the optimum performance, right? So I hope this confusion is clear, that why the market for the 65 nanometer, 28 nanometer won't be dead if we move to 2 nanometer or 1 nanometer kind of technology. These are two different areas, right? So I hope this point was very much clear to you. So what we will do now, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask me. I just have 2-3 MCQs to take today. After that we will just wrap up the session. We won't be doing this for complete 2 hours maybe. So please feel free to ask me if you guys have any doubts. I'm stopping here for 5 minutes just to take your doubts. Please unmute yourself. Anything that you didn't understood? Did I go too fast that everything went above your head? At least I need some feedback from one or two guys at least, so that I can rectify my lecture accordingly in the next session. Were you able to understand whatever I taught, or it was too fast or something? Okay, you were able to understand most of the stuff. Okay, okay, got it. I will try to reduce it. Yeah, sure. Okay, let me see the chat section. I guess somebody just messaged. Okay, great. So I'm getting good positive feedback. So I will try to reduce my speed. So from the next session onwards, I will try to work on it. Okay, so let's move on to the problems, I guess. So now, I guess you guys must have done this. So you guys should be active now, because these are just 2 or 3 MCQs that I will be just taking today. So can you guys just unmute yourself and tell me whether silicon and germanium are direct band gap or indirect band gap semiconductors? Indirect, great, right? Indirect band gap semiconductors, right? So now, and what is the reason for this? So if you just draw the EK diagram, just a minute. Oh, sorry, this is not K, this is not E, this is K, right? The momentum. So now, if you see, okay, this should be completely, just a minute, my drawing is very bad. Yeah, yeah. So you call the semiconductor direct band gap only if this maximum of the valence band and the minimum of the conduction band, it exactly overlaps on top of each other. But you know that does not happen with the silicon and germanium, right? So that's why they are indirect band gap semiconductors. So for the question number 2, again this is a very standard question. Can anyone of you tell me the answer for this? Which of the following is correct in terms of the conductivity? Second option, right? Very good. Metal is highly conductive than semiconductor than the insulator. And how are you judging it? You just need to look at the band gap difference, right? So now let's move on to the next question. So I guess this will be the last question for today. I won't, not a last question. We may have one more question after that. Yeah, so now let's see what they have asked. So this question actually came in the GATE exam, EC 2014. The cutoff wavelength of light can be used for intrinsic excitation of the semiconductor material of the band gap 1.1 eV. So now what the question is actually asking us, so now there is a semiconductor and it has the band gap Eg equal to this 1.1 electron volt. Now I am shining some photons on this semiconductor whose energy is maybe, let's say, I can say that E photon, right? Now what I want, see, the excitation is only possible, these electrons can only excite to the conduction band only if the energy of the photons that I am actually impinging on the semiconductor is actually greater than the band gap energy of the semiconductor, right? See, this electrons has to travel the distance from this valence band to the conduction band, right? How can they travel if the energy of the photon incident on them, which is exciting them, is itself lesser than the Eg? It cannot happen, right? So now I have to make sure that E photon, energy of the photon, is actually greater than the band gap energy. Now from your class 12 physics, you must have seen that the photon energy is nothing but hc by lambda, right? Now they are asking me the cutoff wavelength. So they are telling me, just tell me the value of lambda, right? Lambda of cutoff, right? They are asking me the lambda cutoff, so that the photon energy is barely sufficient enough to excite the electrons, right? So now what I will write, hc upon lambda should be greater than Eg, correct? Greater than or equal to. But for the cutoff case, they are asking me the minimum, like they are asking me the bare minimum energy of the photon required to excite. So for that, I can write, for that particular condition, I can write hc by lambda cut is equal to Eg, correct? Now what I have to do, I just have to substitute few values. So let me just do one thing. Let me just write lambda cutoff is equal to hc divided by Eg, correct? So now let's substitute few values and let's try to see what answer we get, right? So what is the value of h? H is nothing but your Planck constant, right? 6.6 into 10 to the power minus 34. And what is the speed of the light? 3 into 10 to the power 8. And now what is the value of Eg? Eg is in electron volts, right? So now Eg I can easily put as 1. What is the value of Eg? 1.1. 1.1. Now I can do one thing. Since this is in electron volts, I have to multiply by Q also, right? So I have to multiply by charge of the electron, that is 1.6 into 10 to the power minus 19. Correct? So now the moment you do this calculation, you will find that the answer for this lambda cut will come around to be, I guess, around 1.125 micrometers. 1.125 micrometers, and let's see if this option has been given in the question or not. So of course this option has been given 1.125. So this was the correct answer that came in for the question that came in the ECE GATE 2014, right? Now just last one more question, after that we will wrap up because I have already bored you guys a lot. So now let's look at the question. Again, this question has been taken from the Donald Neumann's book, Professor Donald Neumann's book. So an electron has a kinetic energy of 12 milli electron volt. Determine the de Broglie wavelength. So now what should I do? So first of all, I have to find a relation actually which relates the kinetic energy with this de Broglie wavelength, right? So now first of all, if I just talk, then I know this formula. E is equal to what? P square by 2m. E is nothing but P square by 2m, where E is nothing but my kinetic energy. So and P is nothing but the momentum. So P I can write like root of 2m into E, correct? I can write it like that. Then I just have to substitute few values. And why I will calculate the P first? Because from the de Broglie's formula, I know that lambda is nothing but h upon P, correct? Lambda is nothing but h upon P, and this is from the de Broglie's wavelength formula. De Broglie's formula, right? So the moment I get the value of P from here, I will just substitute it here because the Planck's constant value is known to me, and since h is known and P I will calculate, I can get the de Broglie wavelength, right? So now let's calculate the value of P first. P will be under root of 2 into, what is the mass of the electron? 9.1 into 10 to the power minus 31 kgs, right? Into E. What is the E? 12 milli electron volt, right? But it is electron volt. So I have to do something. I have to multiply it by the charge of the electron. that is 1.6 into 10 to the power minus 19. Correct? So if you calculate this value, then the value of P will come out to be around 5.91 into 10 to the power minus 26. And what will be the units? Kg meter per second. Correct? So this is the value of P. Now I will substitute it. Maybe I will just write it. This is 1, this is 2. So now substitute 1 into. Correct? So now what is the lambda that I will get? So h is nothing but again Planck's constant, 6.6 into 10 to the power minus 34. What is the value of P? 5.91 into 10 to the power minus 26. So if you calculate the value of lambda, right? So then this value of lambda will come something about like 111.6 Armstrongs. Now what the hell is this Armstrong? So 1 Armstrong is nothing but your 10 to the power minus 10 meters. So just remember this. Again, the first part was very easy, right? So now what we will do, we will of course move on to the next part, and let's see what has been asked in that part. So now in that part, a particle with a mass, so this is not an electron, maybe a particle with a mass has been given to us, and the de Broglie wavelength has been given to me for that particular particle. Determine the momentum and the kinetic energy of the electron, right? So now let's see how can we solve this question. So maybe I will just write part number B over here. Just a minute. Part B. So what is the formula for kinetic energy? P square by 2m. Now let me check. See, they are asking me both the things. So first they are asking me to calculate the energy, and they are also asking me to calculate the momentum, right? So now from the de Broglie's formula, right? So from the de Broglie's formula, what can I write? P is nothing but h by lambda. I need to know the wavelength somehow to calculate this P, and once the P is calculated, I will put it in this formula because the mass of the particle has been given to me, right? Since the mass of the particle is given to me, only unknown remaining is the P. To calculate the P, I need to know the lambda, that is the wavelength, right? So let's check whether lambda has been given or not. So of course the lambda has been given to me over here, 112 Armstrongs, right? So now let's substitute everything. We know how to proceed to calculate the P and the E, right? So now from this over here, let's substitute the values. H is nothing but 6.6 into 10 to the power minus 34. Lambda has been given as 112 Armstrongs. Armstrongs is nothing but 10 to the power minus 10, right? So 10 to the power minus 10, correct? So now let's see what is the value of P that we will be getting. So if you calculate, then the value of P that you will be getting, it will be something like 5.91 into 10 to the power minus 26 kg meter per second. The moment I know the value of P, I can use this equation. This is the first equation, right? I can substitute this value. Let me just write it. So substitute in 1 to calculate E, right? That is your kinetic energy. So now let's substitute it. E is nothing but P square, that is 5.91 into 10 to the power minus 26 the whole square, correct? Divided by 2 into the mass. So what is the mass that has been given? 2.2 into 10 to the power minus 31. So you can see over here, this is the mass that has been given. 2.2 into 10 to the power minus 31. Correct? So if you calculate this energy, right? So now this energy will actually come in terms of joules. I have to convert it to electron volts to get a representable number, right? So I have to have the factor of 1.6 into 10 to the power minus 19 included over here, right? So now once you do that, then you will get the value of energy as something around 49.8 milli-electron volt. Correct? So what was the last time the energy of the electron came? It came around 12 milli-electron volt, and this time it came around, for this particle it came around 49.8, right? So you know the reason why these two energies came different. Of course the mass of the electron was different, and if you compare the momentum numbers, right? So in the first question, the first part, the momentum that we got was around 5.91 into 10 to the power minus 26, right? In this question also we got almost the same number, maybe few digits will be different, right? But the thing that was different was the mass of the mass what that we have for this particle. For this particle, the mass is 2.2 into 10 to the power minus 31. For the electron, it was 9.1 into 10 to the power minus 31. Since the denominator is less over here for this particular particle, that's why its kinetic energy came out to be higher than the first part, right? In the first part, the electron had the kinetic energy of 12 milli electron volt, and this time we have around 49.8 milli electron volts, right? So I hope this question was very much clear to you. So this is the all thing that I had today for my presentation. So if you guys have any doubts, then please feel free to poke me. I'm happy to answer your doubts. Any doubts, any part that you didn't understand, you want some more clarification? Assignment, I haven't looked into it. I guess there is still time, right? And I guess we have been told to not reveal answers for the assignment question, because I guess the deadline is still not over for that, right? You want some clarification on the assignment question? A second one, I don't have the assignment in front of me. If you have the you can do one thing. See, I'm not a regular TA for this course. I'm here to conduct the live doubt solving sessions for or to conduct the live, not doubt solving, the problem solving sessions, and to give you some different insights which the course instructor cannot actually cover. So the you can actually, you have joined the Google group, right? There is a Google forum on that NPTEL page, I guess Swayam page, right? So you can, whatever questions you have, I guess you can put the whatever doubts you have, you can put over there. The regular TAs actually will clarify the doubts in the assignment. I hope that is clear. Any more doubts, guys? Any feedback you want to give? And okay, GitHub data. Okay, what did he mention exactly? Okay, okay. The GitHub. Can you tell me what exactly did he say? Did he say that he will upload that GitHub link on the Swayam, or what? Okay, you need that link. Okay, I will contact professor and will let you know if I get the link, and then I will just maybe, I don't have the access to that Swayam page. I guess I can just tell the regular TS to upload on the Google, that Google forum itself, where lots of people ask doubts, right? So I will give them the feedback. They will upload the link. Yeah, sure. Guys, and one more thing, can I guess the one or two guys must have already done the problem solving session. So I just want a feedback from you. Do you want me to solve a lot of problems and give you a less insights about the semiconductors, whatever I taught for the first one point almost 80 minutes or 90 minutes? So do you want me do you want me to assign more time to that particular thing, or do you want me to solve a lot of problem? Because I gave a lot of time to that particular part, because this was an introductory lecture, right? So I have few more things which I can just make a PPT, and maybe regarding the chat GPT or Nvidia, regarding the AI boom and how it will affect the semiconductor industry and all. So I have some things like that. So do you want me to take some, let's say the lecture is of maybe 2 hours, so do you want me to at least take 40-45 minutes for that part, and maybe during the rest of the 1 hour we can solve problems? Will it be okay, or do you want me to cover a lot of problems in the 2 hours itself? So based on the feedback, I will modify the upcoming lectures. Problems? Okay. I want more responses. One of the, I guess, one participant responded more problems. What about other guys? You can just unmute yourself or type in the chat section. There is a fight now. Somebody said more insights. Okay. Sorry, I was not able to hear you. Can you please repeat? Okay, okay, no, okay, yeah. Okay, I guess one guy suggested a very good thing. I guess he told me to maybe for 30 to 40 minutes, I guess I can take the insights maybe. So maybe we will just do one thing. We will just reduce the time for insights. Maybe 30 to 40 minutes, I guess I will contribute for the insights, right? And for rest of the part, maybe how much time I will be left with? I guess I guess 70 minutes because 10 minutes we will have a break. So for 70 minutes, we will solve a lot of problems from the reference books, right? And maybe 30 40 minutes, I guess, in each 30 40 minutes in each session, I guess I can cover the insights. Okay, somebody just mentioned please take the sessions separately for problems and insights. See, I just have 2 hours of time in a week, right? I have just 2 hours of time in a week, and I cannot assign more than that because I have my own research work, right? So I cannot take the separate sessions because NPTEL has instructed us to finish one session which will be of 2 hours, maybe close to 2 hours. So unfortunately, I cannot do that. I would have done that. I would have loved to do that because even the taking 2 hours of lecture straight is very difficult task, and it is very difficult to listen as well. I'm still a student, right? So I know how painful it is to have a lecture of 2 hours. I would have loved to do that, but unfortunately, I don't have a control over it. So what we will do, we will just take the insights maybe for 30 40 minutes, and maybe we will take the problems for 70 minutes. If for a particular week I found that there is not a lot of problems that I can cover for this session, then I will increase the time for insights. So that adjustment we will do. So, okay, guys, any more questions? I guess everybody got the link, right? Or do you want me to copy paste the link for the YouTube channel once again? You got the link, right? Okay, great. So, okay, guys, we will wrap up the session. So, have a nice evening ahead. Enjoy the weather if there is a rain in your state or maybe in your city. So, have a great weekend ahead, and have a great evening. Take care. Bye bye. Yeah, thank you. Ah, yeah, tell me. Oh, okay. Can I just stop a recording for a moment? Just a minute. Yes. I guess something happened with my PC. I'm not able to move my mouse. Just a minute. This is very weird. I guess I should be out of this mess. Just a minute. Yeah. Okay, just a minute. Mm, yeah, it looks like my mouse is not working. I guess I have to restart the PC. Okay, just ask me. I guess I have to edit the part of the video. Oh, yeah, you were saying something? Yeah, yeah, just a minute, just a minute, just a minute. I'm able